Welcome into another conference tournament preview. This one, the Big 12 tournament. This one also tipping off on Tuesday, along with the ACC tournament. This one has four first-round matchups with, 8 teams in the league sitting with buys. 4 of them with single buys, 4 of them with double buys here. It's a big conference tournament, 16 teams in the league. We've got 4 games Tuesday that are all just not really that thrilling. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't get too excited looking at these matchups.
No, me either. And typically the Big 12, they usually have like the best first round matchups of any power conference league. And like in past years, especially maybe them and like the SEC are usually like the most fun first rounds. But the bottom half of the Big 12 just wasn't really all that great this year. And there's a lot of teams that the bottoms just fallen off. Like obviously Arizona State, like they don't have any players left. Colorado's been terrible all season long. UCF, they've also fallen off a cliff since like early to middle of conference play where, they actually looked pretty promising. The offense looked pretty damn good, honestly. And then they kind of just started to fall off a cliff. They didn't make shots and the defense was pretty horrendous, which is the backbone of a Johnny Dawkins team. So yeah, there's a lot of teams. And I mean, 11 seed Utah, their coach got fired. Like there's just not a ton going on here. Wes Miller, hopefully about to be fired. So it's not all that exciting. And yeah, K-State, I mean, they kind of fell off a cliff too. There's just so many teams the bottom fell out. And yeah, I mean, obviously definitely exciting that these games are finally here, and like they should make for some fun games to watch, at least from a competition standpoint. Like they should be fairly close spreads at least, and close down to the wire, but maybe not the highest of quality of basketball compared to past Big 12 seasons.
You know what I'm most excited about some of these first round matchups in the Big 12 and the ACC is that half these teams I'm never going to have to watch again this year. I'm sick of them. Like Cincinnati, honestly, like I think they're going to win that game, but I hope they lose because I'm sick of them. Like they can't score. They're brutal to watch. Same thing with like Colorado, Arizona State. Like those teams just need to go away. I'm ready for them to start shopping in the portal because it's not very fun to watch. I don't even want them on my schedule anymore.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of why I was ready for the regular season to be done, at least on the power conference scale, just because I was so sick of watching some of these teams. Like they were just winning some games just because they were playing at home. And like, I mean, Cincinnati, I'd say is probably the best team from this crop of the first round games. Like their offense is definitely improved from their early conference play. Just I mean, they couldn't make a shot to save their lives. They made some lineup changes, added more Josh Reed. Skillings was playing a little bit less, and they just tried to, like Wes Miller at least tried to address the situation by adding more offense, more shooting. But ultimately, like the last couple games, like they've just looked pretty horrific again on the offensive end, and you know they stopped making 40% of their threes like they did for a 5-6 game stretch, and they're starting to look like early season Cincinnati again. But yeah, I definitely say they're the best team from this group, and they sadly might have the most upside from this entire group of first rounders. Maybe K-State, because we've seen the flashes for them, but yeah, not any teams from this crop that can necessarily make a deep run just because the top of the Big 12 is so good.
Yeah. Is there a matchup here that you're pretty excited about? I mean, like we said at the outset, not really for me. I mean, I guess if I had to pick one, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State, I guess.
I wasn't sure if you were going to pick one.
I don't know. I mean, I just like I look at these matchups and I'm not really all that thrilled. Like I'd rather watch I'm probably going to watch the America East playoffs on Tuesday instead of this garbage.
I'm watching that regardless, to be honest. But
right.
But yeah, I'd probably say Cincinnati, Oklahoma State is the most exciting matchup. We just saw that matchup though to end the regular season, and Oklahoma State was able to win that game. But hopefully, maybe or not hopefully, but maybe some revenge for Cincinnati, and they have so much. They do have a lot of talent on this team, but it just hasn't really gelled together, and they just don't really they don't have enough shooting to like connect all the dots on the offensive end. So yeah, not just a real disappointment as
Let's
I've
just
talked about enough times here.
let's just end all these first round games in ties, and they can all just go home.
Yeah, because I don't want to see any of these teams make a run through the Big 12 and win the Big
No.
12 tournament. And like I didn't like the NC State run last year. Like I know that's probably an unpopular opinion. Like that's not a team I want to see in the Final Four. Like I want to see the four best teams in the Final Four. I don't want to see a team that went on a a magic carpet ride all the way through the all the way through the conference tournament and then ride that energy through the NCAA tournament and do that. It was just a bit ridiculous, and I was waiting for it to end, and hopefully that doesn't happen here.
Yeah. Um, Now looking ahead, potential matchups. There's one I'm circling right away, and this game just happened last week, and that's Iowa State and BYU. This is a game I hope we get to see again. I hope that one of these clown teams, Cincinnati or Oklahoma State, doesn't ruin that for us. I don't think they will. I think we'll see Iowa State BYU in the quarterfinals again in that 4-5 matchup. And this is a game I think that's going to be really, really fun yet again. Iowa State's defense turned over BYU, 29 times last week, but BYU still managed to find a way to win. But, that game was just thrilling. So this is a game that I hope we get to see as fans.
Yeah, that's probably the game to circle out of this entire tournament, and I think Iowa State knows what they need to do from the get go in this game. They got to apply pressure from the jump. I don't think they did a very good job of that early on. BYU felt pretty comfortable, and they went on that early run in the second half, I believe, where they just made every shot that they took for a little bit. And
Yeah.
this offense is pretty incredible to watch when it's clicking on all cylinders. It will, yeah, it'll be a super fun game. I do think BYU has some advantages on the offensive end when they're not turning it over. Hitting the weak side shooters for threes on skip passes or when you force defense into rotation. But I like if I had to pick a winner in that matchup, I would say Iowa State. I think that pressure is going to be a little bit too much, and this offense is better when fully healthy, but I'm starting to think it's looking like just old Iowa State from like the last couple of years where they have a super high floor and it's a really good defense, but the offense just doesn't have that top tier upside in order to like make a run through a tournament or make a run, especially like through an NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I agree. Another matchup or a few other matchups to note. I think Kansas Arizona rematch of yesterday could be a fun one, as well as whoever wins that game, presumably playing Texas Tech. I think that would be another fun game as well. A little bit more fun in this conference at the top, at least in comparison to the ACC. So, um, you know, of these teams, um, who do you see having the most favorable path to win it?
Houston. I mean, I think it's especially with that first round game, like they're going to draw either most likely TCU or West Virginia, and those are like West Virginia's reeling right now. That offense is just really bottomed out. So I think regardless, I mean, whoever they play in that quarterfinal matchup, I think they win pretty easily. And I think if they play BYU, I think they have a ton of advantages. I like we saw BYU struggle against pressure. Houston applies, the best pressure, especially in the half court in the entire country. I think they can turn them over 15, maybe even 20 times in that game and get all over the offensive glass as well and win that game. And this is like spoiler, this is my pick to win it. And I think they have an extremely good path to get there. And like even if they play at Iowa State, I just don't think Iowa State has enough offense. I don't think they have enough consistent shooting to beat Houston's defense over the top, which is the way you can get them. I think the only team that would have a real like punching chance here would be Texas Tech because of their shooting ability at four positions and their ability to get on the offensive glass. They can create a lot of offensive value in that game. But overall, I think Houston is the class of this league, and they have the most favorable path in this entire conference. And Yeah, even from like a betting perspective, like I'll be betting them at they're minus 110 to win this league, and I think that's honestly a pretty good number, especially if you get because the bottom half of the bracket is it's more wide open. Baylor obviously has the talent to potentially get through. I don't really love that team. I know you don't really love them all that much either, but there's definitely a little bit more balance down at the bottom with Texas Tech, Arizona, and Kansas. Like I could see any of those four teams making it to the final. Houston or on the top half of the bracket. I don't really see it that way. I think Houston can kind of run through the top half.
Yeah. Do you think there is some value on Iowa State though at whatever their number is? Like, they're not going to. They're most likely not going to beat Houston, but when they're at their best, we've seen they're capable of beating anybody.
Yeah, I mean they're sitting like odds wise, they're sitting at plus 700. Like I personally do think they get by BYU, but it's just a matter of beating Houston, which they're going to be a 6, 7 point dog, maybe even a little bit more against that team, and then they're going to have to beat a Texas Tech or an Arizona or a Kansas down at the bottom. So, like for like a pure number from a betting perspective, I think it might even be a little bit short. I just think they have to win a couple of huge games as opposed to Houston, who really only has to win one big game, like one and a half, and like in the championship. So, I think Houston has a super favorable path, and I don't really see many other teams with like not it's not a cakewalk, obviously, but they definitely have a favorable path.
Yeah, another team whose path I do like though is Texas Tech, at least to get to the semi. Um, they get the winner of Kansas State and Baylor, presumably, as long as Arizona State doesn't to go on some magical run. But I think that they have a lot of upside against either one of those teams. I think that they knock off either one of those teams pretty easily. I know Baylor has the talent, but I just they just haven't put it together. Defensively, they're not very good. On the glass, they're not very good. Um, I think Texas Tech can really bother them with their pressure, um, and I think that they kind of get a pretty relatively easy path. Just got to win one game against one of those teams just to get to the semis. I think on that bottom, Kansas and Arizona are going to have to play each other, which I view as a much more difficult matchup than who Texas Tech is going to have to play.
Yeah, definitely a much more favorable path. They probably have the best path of the teams at the bottom of the bracket. But I mean, even K State, like they've shown flashes of playing really good basketball. They've beat Kansas at home, beat Arizona at home, beat Iowa State on the road. Like they've shown the ability to play up with solid competition. So I could potentially see them making a bit of a run. Like I don't think they're going to get to the semis or the finals by any means, but I do think there's a chance for them to make a little bit of a run. And we've seen Texas Tech be a little bit vulnerable at times to some of the bottom teams in this league when they're not making their threes at a high clip. So I could see them getting bounced in that first game, but I obviously, if I had to make a pick, I would say Tech's going to win that.
Yeah. So that leads us into our predictions. Now I'll show yours first, Cody. Ours are going to be very similar again, I think. Like you talked about Houston winning it all, but I'll let you speak to it a little bit more here.
Yeah, I just think I would be a little bit surprised if Houston didn't win this, to be honest. And yeah, like the way we've talked about, the path is so favorable. But yeah, I have Iowa State beating BYU in that revenge game. I think their pressure is a little bit too much. And I guess the biggest upset I have throughout this bracket is K State getting to the quarterfinals. I have them beating Baylor. We're both pretty low on Baylor. I just don't see them being able to put the pieces together in this tournament setting. Although, I mean, their talent can play up, but I just think they have a lot of concerns on both ends. They don't shoot it all that well for a team that kind of lives and dies by their guard play. And if they get into foul trouble against anyone, I think it's a really tough situation for them. And like I said, we've seen the upside from K State. So I do have them getting to the quarterfinals before losing to Texas Tech. I did pick Arizona to beat Texas Tech in the semis. I don't feel fantastic about it. I think that's a definitely a coin flip game. I do think Arizona can get on the offensive glass a little bit against Texas Tech, and it's not a fantastic matchup outside of that. It'll depend on how the pace is played, and Caleb Love's going to have to play really well. But just a stand that I'm kind of willing to take is like Texas Tech isn't going to make shots at a super high clip every single game, especially on a neutral floor. So that's just the stance I took on that. And then Houston against Arizona in the championship game. It's a perfect matchup for Houston. You know, I bet this earlier in the year when Houston went to Arizona and they beat them there.
They
Houston just
struggled that
plays.
game too.
They did, and they still were able to play the game at their pace and were able to scratch that game out. They were able to force enough turnovers and force the perimeter of Arizona to beat them. And obviously, we have our stance on Arizona's guards. They're just not all that good, and they just don't have the ability to beat you over the top. So, yeah, don't feel great about Arizona. I could easily see Texas Tech winning that game, but overall, I think Houston is the class of this league, and they're going to show that in the conference tournament as well.
Yeah. Now for me, pretty similar looking bracket. I had also picked Kansas State to the quarters. Um, pretty much the same. I actually had TCU. Did you have TCU in that one, getting to the quarters as well?
I had West Virginia over
Okay.
TCU.
Okay. So I took a couple double digit seeds to get to the quarterfinals, TCU to go play Houston. And then same thing, Iowa State, Houston, Texas Tech. The one difference I had is I went back to the Kansas well. Kansas just beat Arizona yesterday at home. Little bit of a choppy game. Could have gotten up, had a chance to go up 16 in the first half, missed both free throws, ended up having it cut to 9 over the next 2 minutes at halftime. Ended up actually trailing in that game at one point, but pulled it out at home. Hunter Dickinson was great. I think that I just trust the coaching more of Bill Self in the tournament setting. I know this Kansas team isn't very good, and AJ Storr and Rylan Griffin have been terrible. There's really no other way to put it. But Zeke Mayo, Hunter Dickinson, I think they both have advantages against this Arizona defense that can lead them to a win. And I don't like the Arizona guards in terms of their shooting ability over the top. I thought Kansas did a solid job yesterday of forcing them to take those pull-ups in the mid-range, which they're willing to take, Arizona is, but contesting them well enough and then doing a good job rebounding the basketball out of that. So I think Kansas, especially when they play that double big lineup, which they pretty much do exclusively, KJ Adams, even though he is undersized, he is solid on the boards, great athlete. So I think that Kansas's experience, their coaching ultimately gets them over the top in that game. But I could see it going either way because this Kansas team just isn't very good. But then when it comes to Kansas, Texas Tech, I think Texas Tech gets them again, setting up a Houston, Texas Tech final with Houston, I think just getting the job done. But I would expect that game to be a really good game, similar to how it was at Texas Tech recently. Back and forth with Houston ultimately pulling away, but in a low possession, low scoring game with some big shots down the stretch by some of these experienced guys to put them over the top.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the one matchup I'm concerned about with Houston is in that championship game against Texas Tech. I mean, they beat them on the road and then, kept it close at home, but they were without McMillan and Darian Williams. So they were kind of just,
Right.
playing at a disadvantage. And at full strength, I absolutely think they can win. They absolutely have the upside. They can shoot 40 to 45% from three and absolutely win that game. We've seen it happen. So if there was one matchup from this tournament that I'm worried about for Houston, it would be that one. Because we've seen it in the NCAA tournament. Like that's where they lose these games is when they get spaced out and they're not able to turn over these guard heavy teams as often. And, it leads to their defense being a bit vulnerable. So yeah, I definitely could see Tech winning it, but overall, I just think Houston is easily the class of this league.
Yeah, it's too bad, right, that we have the first two conference previews we've done. Both we're picking the number one seed to basically just kind of walk to the championship. in years past, especially in this league, like even if you were the 1 seed, it was no walk in the park because you'd run into, like, Kansas typically is the 1 seed, right? You'd run into Baylor or Houston now, Iowa State, who's obviously been really competitive over the last 4 or 5 years, Texas when they were in the league, um, Oklahoma, West Virginia has been really good in the past. It's just not the same league right now as it was, which is why the SEC has kind of taken over that top dog in terms of the best league in the country.
Yeah, and I'll pick my spots throughout these pods to be a little bit more bold. But for these first two leagues, I think there are clear paths for the 1 seeds, and you know, it's but there's a difference between being bold and being a bit stupid. So I'm just going to take the 1 seeds here and run away with it.
Yeah. So before we wrap this one up, same thing as we did in the ACC. How many teams in this league get in?
It's looking like what, 8 right now? I think that would be right. There's not a ton of teams on the bubble either, so I think it's pretty clear cut. I mean,
Now,
Baylor's sitting on the bubble, West Virginia.
could either of those teams play themselves into that bubble a little bit more sketchy if either one or both of them lose in their first game in this tournament?
Potentially. I think it would depend on the bid stealers. But I mean, I don't think we're going to see 5 bid stealers again. I mean, there was an opportunity for one today with Bradley, but it doesn't look like there's going to be 5 of them. So I think Baylor maybe with a first round or second round loss to either K State or, I mean, if it's Arizona State, I mean that makes it even worse. So in West Virginia, they look like they're sitting on like the 9 line, so I think they're okay too. So I think it's pretty definitively 8 teams right now that are going to get in. So I don't think there's any case for. I mean, Cincinnati was sitting on the bubble, but those last 2 losses threw them out. So yeah, eight's the number for me.
Yeah, I see 8. I would like it to be, quite honestly, I'd like it to be 6. I don't
Yeah,
really want to see Baylor or West Virginia in my tournament, but unfortunately, we're gonna see them, I think, unless something crazy happens. But I think Baylor's just kind of gotten too much respect throughout the whole season anyway. Um, they haven't been very good all season. Haven't really won many big games, even at home, where they've typically had a lot of success. So I guess, like, they have the respect because they're Baylor and they won a national championship a few years ago. But, like, I'm not sure they'd beat UNC.
yeah. I think
I,
they're
I think it'd
slightly
be
better.
but I think it'd be like a good game. Like, I think that's
Yeah,
like a comparable game, and like UNC's not in. I just don't really want to see Baylor in the tournament.
yeah. I mean, I don't even know what great wins do they have. Do they have like any fantastic wins that stand out? Like Kansas at home would be one that I recall.
In a 21-point comeback.
Besides that, I don't
Yeah,
really recall. Like
I
St.
mean,
John's is a really good win now. That took a
yeah,
miracle with Jeremy Roach, but
yeah.
yeah, it's
I
just not
mean,
all that inspiring. I mean, I think it has to be 8 just because there are some power leagues that haven't really been all that good. Like the ACC is going to help out some of these other conferences and, help them ultimately get 8. I think if the ACC was a little bit stronger, I think we'd be talking about 6 teams out of this league. We'd be talking about why is the Big 12 so bad this year? And obviously
yeah,
it's been a little bit of a down year just because the bottom half teams have been pretty downright terrible in the second half. But
yeah,
yeah, so yeah, I'd say eight's a number.
yeah. I mean, they did beat Tarleton State by like 65
Yeah,
in
it's a
week
great
2.
win.
Matters. But other than that, right? That's it for the Big 12 conference tournament preview. Games tipping off Tuesday afternoon. I'm sure some of you out there will be uh, doing work while you're watching the games. Um, double monitor, one game on one, work on the other. So enjoy these games. But that's it for us. We'll talk to you in the next conference tournament preview.